Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodian of the land on which we meet today and pay my respect to their elder, past, and present. And I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I also pay my special respect to all the fallen heroes from Spring Revolution in Myanmar and all our participants from different parts of the world to join AMI seminar today. Our AMI President Christopher Lam will introduce you with the speaker. Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you, May Chair. And what we will do in a couple of minutes is start the program, but there are people still coming. So I'm going to tell you a very quick story about why this is such an important subject. My own point of view. Who is that? Is that you, Lunin? No.
Yes, Chris.
Yeah.
I didn't hear anything because I'm mute and didn't connect computer. So Cho make it, and she's laughing about me.
Okay.
Yes.
We'll put yourself on mute now. That's good. In 1986, when I arrived in what was then called Rangoon by us foreigners to become ambassador, I presented my credentials a few weeks later to General Sanyu, who at that time was the state president. And I had met him before when I was in the embassy in the early 1970s. And he asked me,
in anyway.
what is that? He asked me what I thought had changed in the country since then. And I said, well, the arrival of your new constitution, the socialist constitution in 1974, meant that for a lot of people, they had to cope with a really heavy bureaucracy in each village, township, state, region, and national level. There were courts, there were inspectors, there were advocates, there were all sorts of things. And I said, I think it's going to be hard to run the country with the bureaucratic burden that this places on administration. And then I said, I haven't got much else I can say because I've only been here a few weeks. And he looked at me and he said, you know, you're not wrong. We have loaded up the bureaucracy too heavily, and that and some other things are going to have to change. And we recognize that it puts a burden on people. But I have to say to you that we will be safe as a government. No problem for us as a government for as long as the people can eat. And then, of course, in 1987, Ne Win did his second demonetization. In 1988, the Ne Win regime fell apart, largely because, in my view at the time, of food shortages and food prices. And so I thought that I could see a lot of that story being repeated again now. And we've watched the collapse in the value of the chat and desperate efforts being made by the central bank to hold the chat together, but also lots of problems in agriculture. So we thought it would be a good idea to have a seminar looking at food and food insecurity and whether that told us anything about the way the future of the country will go. And so we have two really interesting experts here tonight. One of them, Mr. Ba, who is in Yangon, and that's a pseudonym. He can't present his proper name without serious danger coming his way. And then in less danger, Professor Tway Tway Thane of Curtin University, who is here as well, and she will speak second. But first of all, for about 15 minutes, Mr. Ba, would you like to start now? And he has some slides as well. And so does Tway Tway, I think.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah. So everybody should mute now so that Mr. Ba has uninterrupted access to your minds.
Thank you. Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a pleasure and also an honor for me to have been invited by Ambassador Lam to speak at this very important seminar that's being held today. What I'm trying to do basically is follow up what Ambassador Lam just said, but in more details. I'm speaking and presenting all this to you, and these are views that are my views and not of any organization or institution. Another thing I would like for the audience and participants to understand is that I am a neutral. I have no colors. I'm here in this country to do what I think is sensible and right for the country and the people. So what I'm going to present to you are my views. So some of those views you may already know, some you may not. But after this today, I'm here at your service through Ambassador Lam. If you have any questions or queries you would like to know about Myanmar, I'm happy to answer them for you. So I'd just like you to understand that. So with that, I'd like to start. But before I start, I'd like to pose a question or maybe a thought to everyone that's here today, listening in. And those things are, first, how many of you, before you have your breakfast, your lunch, or your dinner, ever thought about how that food got to your table? Where did it come from? That's the first sort of question. The second, some may be directly, indirectly related to you, but something I'd like you to ponder about. And that is, what would life be for all of us if there were no farmers? When I say farmers, not just in Myanmar, but Australia, England, America, across the world. So I'd like the audience to ponder about this. And then maybe after the presentation, during the question and answer question, I'd like to hear some of your thoughts and your views on those two things. So with that, I want to start my presentation and share the screen with you. Thank you. Okay, so I've been basically asked to talk about insecurity and food. But where does our food come from? Our food comes from the agricultural sector in Myanmar. So if you look at this little first diagram, you can see that nearly 40% of the country's GDP is coming from the agricultural sector. Employment-wise, we have 70% of the entire population that is working in the agricultural sector. But when you actually look at the investment that is in the country in agricultural sector, it's really big, 1%. So what are the other key important data? Well, agriculture is export earning is from 25 to 30% currently. We hope that will rise. 20% of the 65 million hectares of arable land is still only being used. And 80% of farmers in Myanmar actually grows the biggest crop, rice. So if you look at that, it shows basically the importance of agriculture in Myanmar. But when you actually look at that chart again, you can see the investment that has actually been going into agriculture is only one. That really is a number we do need to improve. So we'll get to that later on. What are the key concerns? Right now, and forgive me, but prior to my starting, I did say that I had no colors. But we can't forget what is happening. Recently in February, you all know, and I do not want to reiterate or emphasize what has happened, but we had a military takeover. Because of that, currently 1.2 million jobs have been lost. That could be more, and that is growing day by day. And according to the World Food Programme, the estimate is that by the end of 2021, 3.4 million citizens could go hungry. according to the World Bank, 18% of the country's economy is going to be contracted because of the current situation. And of course, as Ambassador Lam rightly said, the value in the Myanmar kyat has now dipped 60%. Originally in February, it was around to $1 1,300 kyats. But recently in September and now it is standing at 2,700 kyats per dollar. So basically it's a 100% jump. So what are the challenges in agriculture? We can say a lot, but to shorten up the time and to answer, what I basically is whittled it down to 4 important issues. The first is market access. Second is higher input prices. The third, access to agricultural loans and cash shortages, and disruption in transportation. So these are the 4 main key areas that is really now disrupting the Myanmar agricultural sector and its growth. Market access, basically, if I can go on to the next slide. We have one of the biggest population in our north, China. The border with China is now being closed. Many people say it's politically motivated. Some say it's because of COVID-19. Whatever the reason may be, the trade between Myanmar and China has now come to a halt. Our second border crossing is in Bangladesh, and that has now also been closed in July and recently opened. But the trade between Bangladesh and Myanmar compared to that of China is very small. Our third is the one with India. Very much like Bangladesh, it has been closed. However, one little bright spot is the Thai border, especially down in the south via Mysot, is now open, still open. Right now, it's the corn season in Myanmar, and Thailand has an agreement with Myanmar to allow Myanmar corn farmers to export their corn across the border. So that is at least a positive sign, and we are very grateful that this is still going on. However, the market access, because of all the gates being closed, the only route that is out of Myanmar is the sea route. But now people are struggling. Mainly ships are not coming in and ships are not leaving. The reason is because previously, if a container cost $2,000, it now costs around $8,000 in order to do export. So basically, what does that mean? Our exporters are now reluctant to sell their exports abroad, mainly because of the costs. The next issue I'd like to go on to is about higher input prices. Now, as you know, farmers, one of the most important things for them is input, fertilizers, pesticides, and seeds. Now, the prices of input has doubled since February. If you look at the prices last year, fertilizer for 1 sack was only 20,000 kyats. It is now 50,000 kyats. And when I spoke recently to one of the farmers that I work with, that price actually rose to nearly 70,000 kyats. So it's alarming. So the question is, how are the farmers going to cope? Now, because of the prices of inputs and of course, fuel prices, the cost of harvesting is going to increase. What does that mean? Basically, labor costs, manual labor costs are going to rise. Due to the high input prices and costs, and farmers are no longer able to purchase on credit. Normally, in the practice in the past, farmers could go to an input supplier and buy credit. But that system is now no longer available. most distributors now want upfront payment for their if you look at price rise, urea fertilizer prices have risen 52%. Compound fertilizer prices are now 59% higher than it was before. One other issue, the decrease in agri loans. MFIs, which are key for lending farmers, now facing to cash. What's that? Basically, if MFIs used to operate on payments, farmers situation are not able to pay back old loans, which means basically MFIs cannot provide new loans. So the cash shortage reduced basically means agricultural loans inputs are also, so means, as you can see, I just quoted, it's now 50,000 kyats per bag of fertilizer. And of course, what happens is the demands as transactions become difficult. One of those issues, basically, I'm sure will be touched on by Tui in her presentation, because the banking system, the financial system has literally now come to a stop. While saying that, banking can be done online and internet, what we are seeing every day is that basically there are no lines. If you want cash, you need to pay somebody unofficially, maybe 5 to 10% of the amount that you either want to withdraw or you want transferred. So that's not really easy. That's for people in the urban areas. So just think, how can a farmer try to overcome these problems? And when it comes to loans, the official bank, the Myanmar Agricultural Development Bank, used to provide loans 150,000 kyats per acre for monsoon paddy and 100,000 kyats for winter crops. That was before. In 2019 to 2020, it lended 1.75 trillion. That's about US dollar 1.3 billion. However, after February, ADB stated clearly that it will and will lend farmers these new loans on the condition that the farmers repay back their previous loans. So farmers right now are not in a position to pay back their previous loans. They don't have the money, which they don't back. This is a question I'd like maybe. Another issue is the disruptions in transportation. The prices of fuel has gone up 1,900 per liter from 1,000 kyats in early January. That's 3 times. So basically, prices of fuel drives up prices of costs. So it means that people are now paying more for their goods because of the transportation and the prices going up in fuel. Of course, the fuel prices drive transportation. So if we basically want to eat vegetables, previously, if we paid 10 kyats, now we have to pay 30 kyats. So the ongoing instability and tension also is a disruption in transportation. As some of you will know, in Mandalay, in Yangon, it is fairly quiet nowadays, but in other regions, it is still not safe. And therefore, those goods and commodities that are going in and out cannot come, mainly because of this instability. And that basically disrupts transportation, logistics, and also it's also a good reason for the people who are in the business to ask and demand higher prices for these goods. So what's the outlook? According to Mawali, course, Mawali is the Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock, and Irrigation. There is about 1.67 million rice growing acres in 2021. Of that, monsoon season only 13.9%. You can basically see that the numbers haven't actually grown a lot, and that really does not bode well for food security. This year, already as we speak, 150,000 acres of paddy and fields have been flooded across the country. Due to the decrease of use of inputs, crop yields are going to drop. What does that mean? Right now, according to some of the farmers that I've spoken to, farmers are not even thinking of growing their summer paddy. Basically, what I heard is 50% of to normally grow summer paddy are now thinking very hard on whether it should actually grow due to costs of input and, of course, access to finance and cash. So the decrease in market access can basically reduce prices of agricultural. So what we're seeing is what we're eating now in the big cities is basically in the urban areas of Yangon. Some farmers in Shan State, some farmers in many other regions have stopped growing, mainly because of the points that I mentioned for supply, lack of supplies, and of course, logistics problems. Most recently, 2 months who grew tomatoes in southern Shan State because of the literally had to throw those away along the roadside. Why? Because of costs of transportation was too high and they could not cover those costs and it was going to be beneficial for them. So basically, they threw the tomatoes on the roadside, which is really a shame when we're thinking of the world is in shortage of food, and yet this kind of thing is still happening here. And of course, the fallout from the coup. What do we see? Sharp increase in poverty, heightened food security risks, and deeper destitution for those who are already poor. That is ours. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Barr. Thank you very much. That was really quite depressing, I have to say, but it's really important to have this in mind as we think about the future. It's not simply about whether armed groups will rise up or whatever might happen. It's about the whole future of the country as a, as the old rice bowl of Southeast Asia, and as the place which has to be able to feed its people if it's going to achieve anything at all for the future. Can I ask everybody who's been listening to remember that if you have a question you'd like to pose, please put it into the chat box. And after we've heard the second speaker, we'll go to questions and answers, and I'll consolidate the questions from the chat box and put them to the panelists. Now, Mr. Barr, we need to take your screen off the display. Right. Now remove it from the display. End the shared screen. If you can do that. Right now, and now I introduce Tway Tway, who's an associate professor at Curtin University in Perth. And she is a particular expert on the way the economy is going to move. Tway Tway, it's up to you.
Thank you very much. This is Tway Tway. Just checking my screen share is okay.
Yes, but you need to get it one slide at a time.
Yes.
And make it full screen.
Yes.
Good. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My name is Tway Tway, Associate Professor in International Business in Perth, Western Australia. I was born and brought up in Myanmar. Of course, I am an 88 generation, so I've been about 30 years in Australia. So it's an honor to be invited by Ambassador Lam and first speaker, Mr. Ba. I think you nominated me to speak alongside you. This is an honor in itself. Thank you very much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about Myanmar economy, the shape of it following the COVID and the coup, particularly focusing on the banking crisis, because that immediately followed the coup, food insecurity. Mr. Barr and I, we didn't get to synchronize our, play down on that one because he's covered what we had to cover, and the impact on sectors like farming, garment workers, and foreign investors, and where to from here. So, assessing the coup's impact on the Myanmar economy. So when the coup happened, people wonder, will that be, what impact on the economy? Economy will keep going. Or might argue that the regime, a lot of us thought that, had enough resources to withstand the economic pressure and disruption created by the striking civil servants and private bank workers, would be able to keep the Myanmar economy steady. So that's, people were kind of a little bit of pessimistic view about it. But 8 months after the coup, they'll say the economy is anything but stable. If you're an anti-coup person, this is good news, okay, so coup has had a disastrous impact on the economy. Despite the pandemic, so you'll say, oh no, this pandemic. Okay, despite the pandemic, Myanmar economy was expected to bounce back. Both the World Bank and Asia Development Bank focused that. Was supposed to bounce back, okay? But after the coup, the economy has contracted. And, a few months ago was 10% shrinkage and now 18% shrinkage. Compare that to the last 10 years, it has achieved 7% annual growth. So that's pretty big, shrinkage. Banking crisis immediately followed. Why? Because people lost trust in the banking system, because the banking system gone under the military. So it's a trust issue. Why? What you can see, people run on the bank, started to withdraw money. Up until COVID, no withdrawal of money from the bank, because although economic downturn because of the COVID was a political stability under NLD. So there was no run on the bank. So the analyst bank in Myanmar has said it's a crisis of confidence. Please, people do not trust the regime's administration. No wonder that they do not trust the banking system. The crisis will ease only when a democratic government returns. So that alone, if those of you on the anti-coup side will probably take quite a lot of confidence in that the economic spiral down, and that alone will put regime under so much pressure. Okay, the banking crisis is a political turmoil prompted by the coup. What happened? Mass protests, civil disobedience movement, violent crackdowns, disruption of critical services like tourism, telecommunications, banking, health, and education. And the bank has nearly run out of money, so it's a big shortage of cash, and it's been paralyzed, and some branches has been closed for nearly 3 months, and international remittances has reduced, and that has given families really hard time. Because a lot of families in Myanmar, they lived on remittances. So at a party, I met someone who was talking about banking crisis, and some people call for banks, international banks, to be put pressure to stop money going in and out of Myanmar, to further disrupt the economy, and to sanction the military regimes. And one of the questions they asked, then I can't send money to loved ones back home. So this remittance has played a huge role. And then the Myanmar currency chart is free falling, as Mr. Ba has said, lost 60% of its value, and chart has bottomed out to 2,700 and then now about 2,200. That had hit the economy really hard, okay? And then the sudden divergence between the black market rate and the official rate has gone back to my time, you know, when I was there, when I came out here to study, this sort of huge divergence of exchange rates. And the chart value declines, prices of imported goods like fertilizers, pesticides, fuel. So fuel, as Christopher Lamb will, you know, later on continue with this, why fuel prices going up can be a trigger for, you know, further unrest. So we have joblessness and medicines, you know, medical services, food is scarce, you know, once inflationary pressure, import, it is difficult, prices go up. So, you know, it's got a chain reaction to that. And the sea trade has ceased as banks are unable to issue documents needed for import-export goods, and companies are struggling to pay salaries as banks stop functioning. There was a huge disruption to the economy as CDM movement has intended. Central banks started to limit on withdrawals. So no wonder they had a run on the bank before. And CDM of bank workers, and now dollarization of the economy will continue, and a huge economic stagnation is set in. So got this from Facebook. So there's a 3 Qs. Q for cash. You have to queue for your own cash. Q for oxygen. You know, so many people die, so many loved ones die. So on Facebook, you see all these rest in peace messages. And Q for burial. Can't even go in peace. So this is the 3 Qs that characterized what's happening on the ground. Okay, so what if the government could not control, could not arrest this spiral downfall, depreciation of the local charts? What if could not, you know, do it? Remember 2007 saffron revolution that was caused by the government taking away fuel subsidies. People took the street. SAC can do this, can manage the banks. No, hasn't not been effective and will get worse. And dollarization, people hedging against gold will continue and charts will further fall. The only solution is the political settlement. Now, Mr. Ba has mentioned this as well, imports and exports. Imports have been much affected, banking crisis, and remember also the Western nations' sanctions and pressure on not to do business under the military. So the imports have been much affected. Then the question is, oh, that's good for export. Not really, because export sectors like agriculture and manufacturing, they need raw materials they don't have. So both are significantly down. Okay, job losses in the garment manufacturing and construction. I chose garment because it's the area I know. I have a funding, Australian government funding to study this garment manufacturing. Okay, how significant is garment to the economy? 4.4 to 6 billion from garment exports, employ 500,000 people, and over 75% of the sector has been forced to suspend operations since mid-February. 2 reasons. Operational difficulties, you know, not getting raw materials also played a huge role. That's internal. External factors like activist pressure for international fashion labels to suspend orders. So bestseller from Denmark, H&M, both have suspended for a while and then came back in, and now unions are calling for comprehensive sanctions. I'll get to that. So garment workers, garment workers and unions, because the unions concentrated in the garment sector right under NLD last 5 years. So garment workers were at the forefront of this protest movement, and hence also the scenes of massacre. So garment workers left, returned home, also factory closures because of order suspension, and they now something came back and difficult to find jobs and factory closures as well. So when doing business in Myanmar, military is concerned, garment sector, the unions are calling for comprehensive sanctions, labels not to invest, suspend, leave, versus targeted sanctions that a lot of international communities calling targeted sanctions only focus on the military interest, not the manufacturing sector. But I have had a lot of communication with unions. Unions consulted well, and they had good reasons why garment manufacturing, could not do much without the supporting the military. First of all, you have to pay rent, you have to pay royalties, you have to now even pay protections for these garment factories. So their argument is that not possible to claim that your presence is not contributing to the military. But that's much divided here. Some people are only calling for targeted sanctions, only hitting the military, not this sort of high employment garment manufacturing industry. This is divided, no solution yet. Okay, farmers, Mr. Ba has touched on this. I'll be just a very, he has talked about it comprehensively. So yes, so the fertilizer sales reduced, therefore the output will be reduced, and that will spell disaster for the whole country. And also they could not grow much. I heard this on a farmers talking about it. That's because what they're saying is we have cows, we have chicken, we have whatever pigs, and they said we have to eat what we have at hand. So if we have to sell cows, we have to sell cows. I mean, the season came, no cows to plow the land with. So that's the reality, on the ground. And some criticism as well, Mr. Ba, whether you came across this or not. The world has forgotten the growing regions. That's the central Myanmar and Irrawaddy Valley, perhaps while they're focusing on ethnic areas, perhaps. So humanitarian help is blind to farmers, whereas, farmers, growing areas, they're up to 80% and 2/3 of people live there, and debts are growing up, poverty growing up. So it's a time also not to forget the farmers. Okay, it's just poverty. Mr. Ba has elaborated on that. So it's going to be nearly half of the population will be living in poverty by end 2020, and an estimated 1 million jobs could be lost. So it's a humanitarian crisis looming, and UN spokesperson that it's deeply concerned over humanitarian impact, and said, conflict, food insecurity, natural disasters since COVID have left some 3 million women, children, and men in urgent need of life-saving assistance and protection. Foreign investors, okay, what happened? They've suspended, some of them not coming in, some of them have left. So that FDI has dropped 8 years low. So since that looming of democracy, foreign investors came in, last frontier of the world, but that enthusiasm has all dried up. So 8 years low, reflecting post-takeover unrest. Okay, so foreign investors, when it came, the investment down, when they suspend, when they leave, when they withdrew, for 2 reasons. Definitely activist pressure, if you're from the Western nation, definitely activist pressure, banks pressure, all this pressure not to work in Myanmar and not to support, not to give taxes, revenues to the military, because military buys arms with those money. But there's significant operational problem too, because you will notice that when they leave, right, left Myanmar, made a big announcement. Very rarely that they'll mention because of the coup. Some people will even skirt around having to mention this having coup, and they rather say it's operational problem, which are real as well. Yeah, there's a big problems keep popping up every few months, and it's really devastating for business. It's very difficult to plan in such an unstable environment. Therefore, people leave, as well as activist pressure not to keep supporting the military. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matue.
Thank you. So I stop sharing.
Yes, please. Yes, thank you. And thank you very much for what you've presented. We've got a bit of time for questions, not as much as we might have wanted, but of course, what we heard was so important that we can't get away from it. There are a number of questions already in the questions box in the chat room. They will go to the person most capable of answering the question. Let me ask a question that's been on my mind, me being selfish, to Mr. Barr. One of the things that we learned in Australia was that a particular difficulty for farmers forever has been snakebite, and in particular the fatal consequences of being bitten by the Russell's viper. And a lot of work has been done on that in collaboration with partners in Myanmar at Adelaide University. I guess that what you said about inputs means that the inputs that the country would normally need for the pharmaceutical industries to work properly and the veterinary services to supply the antivenin to farmers is not there. Would this be something that would add to the problems that are faced by agricultural producers in Myanmar? Mr. Barr?
Yes, thank you, Ambassador. Of course, I think everything, when we look at what I basically, I do apologize to the audience that, it was really depressing to hear, but I really wanted people to understand what is going on. I could have said some nice and rosy things. The problem is I tried to find something, but the problem was I couldn't find anything. So I do apologize to the audience for not having been able to provide anything that's really, that was rosy. Going back to the question, Chris, I think that it's not, when we talk about agriculture and farmers and inputs, I think there's a bigger picture. Of course, snake bites are the biggest killers for farmers. So the problem is, right now for a farmer, he's not worried about being bitten by a snake, right? He's just thinking, how can I grow something? How can I sell it? How can I survive, right? So that's it. So basically, it's not a priority for him, but of course, it's not his job. It's the Ministry of Health and the authorities to provide these kind of services. But if you know, and you know well in Myanmar, that health and education has never been one of those top areas and priority areas of the country. So I think that for production, of course, it's related to inputs, but I think it's not on the list of priorities, I think, for the authorities, and also same for farmers. I think that farmers basically, they really right now couldn't really care less. Even if there's a crocodile in the paddy field, they will still go there, for fearing that they do need to grow. Of course, if they get bitten, that's another story. So yes, I think that we do need to take into consideration these things like, snake bites. The other things also is that, this COVID-19 thing is actually not going away. A lot of farmers that I spoke to actually are in villages and rural areas in Upper Burma. They're still affected by COVID. Some of them think that this is pneumonia, the typical seasonal pneumonia. And now they find out that this is COVID. So all this growing is not just because of, let's say, what has happened because of, in February, but it's also due to partly because of COVID. And we're still not over COVID. We're not able to handle COVID. It's only in the big cities, yes, the numbers of cases have decreased. But now the government also, on its own initiative, trying to provide vaccines and vaccination to other regions and states in the country. So hopefully, once that has gone the full circle, we will see farmers being able to work because then they're well, they're healthy, they can start working. But I think this venom thing, I think, is something that's always overlooked because health issue in Myanmar, and it's only even in COVID that we realized that our country had what we call shortage in oxygen, right? You can see that the prices of oxygen ventilators shot up. Yeah, we didn't have it. Like hospitals didn't have it. It had to be imported from India and China. So I do hope that, my clarification will actually answer your question, Chris. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question, I'm going to have to move through the questions quickly, so we will need to have quick answers if that's possible, although they obviously need to be discussed. Talking about agricultural production also requires some thinking about livestock and livestock production. One of the questions that we have is about the implications of all this for livestock production, animal-sourced foods, and the livelihoods of livestock farmers. Have you got anything that either of you can say about that? Perhaps, first of all, Mr. Bayu, and then maybe Tue Tue, you know something about market access and prices.
Thank you again, Chris. Shortly, briefly, I think livestock very much like, it's part of agriculture. And as Tue Tue rightly just said, if a farmer has a cow and a pig and chickens today, if he has to survive for tomorrow, that cow is gone. Okay, so this is where we are right now. Is basically people are, just trying to survive on a daily basis. Of course, livestock. The only thing is, one of the biggest companies in Myanmar that is producing poultry called the Ngos from the Netherlands, it has stopped its operations. So that's really sad, you see, because it provides jobs and food, right? What's happening is livestock, even let's say if we are able to produce the chickens and the pigs, the problem, there is no export. China used to buy a lot, now they stopped. So that's where we are. And I think that's also a concern. But of course, on the good side of what I heard is also that the fishery sector is actually doing fairly well. Because as you know, with Thailand, we have the sea route and land route. So Thailand actually is buying a lot of the fish and lobsters. So it's good for that part of the region. But for those others who are like in the poultry or the pigs, it's not really a good situation. But I will leave the rest for my friend Tue Tue to complement the answer. Thank you.
Yeah, no, nothing much more, but also I heard this a lot of looting and bullying by police or so-called police or whatever to farmers. So for example, you need a motorcycle for market access and transport, and that too is taken. And when you have children taken to a police station or arrest, and then you have to also use these things to bribe and get them out. So yeah, so at a grassroots level, equipments are down because of this unrest.
Tue Tue, what you said about looting and the police basically robbing the farmers and the country people, does this mean that the Tatmadaw is unable to supply its own needs at this time, and that's why soldiers are going out looting?
Yeah.
How is the army feeding its people? They've got a big army, lots of families too.
Even before the coup, was what I understand it, with the lower level, soldiers, and they have to fend for themselves. Not that the top ones are very healthy, but not very wealthy. That the young ones, they have to fend for themselves. So it's a lot of growing, selling, raising chicken. So they used to, self-sufficient, but now that things all gone in pear-shaped, so this looting and bullying and that has become part of how they support themselves, and there are opportunists there as well, of course, going around making money.
Right. I'd like to try and work out from our audience whether we have anybody in the audience now who can talk about how this works with the army. And how the army manages to feed itself, because one of the biggest problems the army will face, of course, is if it completely loses the trust of the public. If it hasn't already done that, stealing from the public is a certain way of making things much worse. But we come back to that perhaps. Does the NUG have any credible policies or useful policies on these matters that people outside the country could make use of? Say people in Australia wanted to help the farmers, what could we do? Which did not involve going through the military to try and provide that support.
Chris, I have a saying And I think I said that to you once in one of our previous encounters. And it's a simple saying: when there's a will, there is a way. Okay, and for me, I'm here. I want to facilitate whatever I can in any way I can. But I think we need to find out. We need to work a way, because if this disengagement continues, these farmers, they have no more future. If I spoke to a group of farmers in Shanxi, basically who are now landless, they have no money, and they sold off their land. What's happening is they said one day, farmer, the name of a farmer, that profession is going to disappear. What's worse is these people are basically ethnic, like Pa'u and Danu. What they're worried is culture and their identity will also go. So these are the biggest concerns that I see, that's going to happen later on if there's nothing done. So I think that whatever on the political level, as I said, I don't have colors, I'm not affiliated to anybody. What I like to encourage is that we do need to find ways. We can discuss this, but of course, it needs to be done discreetly. But I think the farmers, if left like this, let's say 6 months down the road, it will be a very, very grave concern. This is just my assessment.
Well, that turns my mind back to President Sanyu in 1986, saying the government would survive provided they could always feed the people. And if they can't feed the people, then do we face again what happened in 1988? One of the questions is, what should we be doing to prepare for impending famine in Myanmar?
What I see, go ahead, Trey, go ahead.
Yeah, no, just first question on the humanitarian help. There's an appetite for it by the international community, and NUG has good infrastructure for it. But the only thing is that humanitarian assistance must not go through the military. So you have to bypass the military, or don't let military, get their hands on this humanitarian help. The thing is, military is even trying to get their hands on vaccines. So, and then sell it at a black market, $50 a shot or something. So that sort of situation you're dealing with. So you have money, appetite, help, wanting to help, but we have to get around the military, because military will use that to buy weapons.
I'm sure that's so, but if you were trying to deliver assistance to a farmer in Magwe, how would you do that without the military seeing that it was happening at the very least and moving in on it?
Well,
you have a lot of contact.
Through UN or NGOs. So that's what they're trying to achieve, and maybe with much delay, I'm sure, because military is central, so they will, don't know how to distribute without the military. But yeah, NGOs and UN, non-political parties.
Well, the UN is an intergovernmental organization. It has to work with the government in place. And even though the ambassador to the United Nations in New York is, of course, Chomo Tun, if you're actually dealing with the people who are holding a gun out there in Magwe, it's much harder for the UN to avoid them. And if you do nothing, then the people starve. If you do something which gets them through the military, that can be misrepresented. Mr. Ba, you have contact with lots of farmers. What are they saying to you?
I actually spoken with a group of people. I don't want to name the country, but it's very close. It's in ASEAN. We're actually working on a way providing finance to farmers. So as we speak, it is in the process. So it's an initiative, basically, trying to provide farmers with small loans during these times. So that I can, but as you asked, it would not be right, and we actually what we're going to do, because we don't want the military to know what we're going to do. I think that yes, there is a way. We're actually on one way, and this is a small country in ASEAN that I'm working with, a group of people who actually, I think, in the same kind of mood that, people from Australia want to help. I think this is the thing that they're doing. So this is, of course, targeted to farmers. So if this is sort of like, if we're able to implement this, in a successful way, then I think maybe we can try to expand it. But I think right now, one of the most important thing is trying to do it under the radar. That is the only way, like you said, and like we said, the less known, the better. We cannot go the normal orthodox way through UN or through the authorities. No, this is not the way. But of course, the other half to that, if it's going to be EU or other countries, they have the procedure formalities, say, oh, it has to be done this way. In this kind of crisis, you cannot do it like that. So we need to be flexible and we need to make some compromises and arrangements. But as I said, there are ways.
Well, we might conduct correspondence offline about that to see what we can provide to help people understand what they can best do. But I know that the CRPH, NUG organizations in Australia are talking a lot about the need for assistance to the NUG, support for health programming, lots of those sorts of issues, work with the education people in the NUG, but we haven't been able to find much about what we can do to help the farmers. And I think we have to respect the fact that they are the largest group in the population, and they are also the people who are going to keep the entire population alive. So how we support them is going to be a central point for AMI for the future. And I'd like to be able to take conclusions that are provoked or that we seek as a result of the very good presentations here tonight out into that debate. There are various NGOs that we know of that are working, and you'll see the name of one of them at least in the chat room. Mr. Ba and Tway, do you know the NGOs who are active in Myanmar working with the agricultural sector?
I don't know.
As you know, because of the current situation, a lot of what we call, they are now basically what we call, they're all under the radar. They try to do what they can, but because they're worried repercussions, because there is no, like Tutu said, looting, that's the biggest thing. There is no law. So, I mean, I have a friend actually, we're actually part of this this group, handing out cooked meals to a small suburbs outside Yangon. So these people are just literally related to any political organization. What they're just doing is handing out cooked meals for poor people. And one day they said, the authorities came and said, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? Just looking at basically tells you that these people, they don't understand. Even if it is something that's good, they cannot see it that way. So now NGOs, I deal basically with farmers individually and groups. So I have my own way. But I think a lot of the sort of small little NGO CSOs actually have stopped their operations. Basically, they do function, but under the radar. So as we see, one of the biggest issues that's going to hit, I think I'm sure Twitwi knows this also, that China just recently announced that starting from January the 1st, 2022, all exports, including Myanmar, going to China, need to be labeled in Chinese. Oh, that's a big task. That's a big task. Burmese farmers and Myanmar farmers who are just, used to just putting on the truck in the sack and then off it goes. Now the Chinese are saying you need to label only English, please. So as I speak, I am actually part of this process of bringing this to the attention of the government. Government is, how can they help the private sector? Because a lot of people, exporters in Myanmar, are going to be affected by it. If it does happen, the economy worse, because a lot of products go to China. It's a big concern.
I look forward
Hopefully,
to seeing...
Twitwi and I will understand.
That would not go down very well with the majority of Burmese, because it's so much, since the coup is so much anti-Chinese sentiment, sweeping through the country. try that. That will be make people very unhappy because just that they thought that, you know, Chinese are behind the generals in the coup.
Well, that gives us a lot more to think about. We've come to the end of our hour. And so what I'm sorry to say that we have to do, because I think we could have questions running on for a long time, but I think we now need to conclude and to thank very much our speakers for what they've said, but also what they've inspired. It's been really good. Thank you very much indeed. We will speak to the speakers about presenting a video of the presentation and provide the PowerPoints. We may need to have a look at these to make sure that they are not going to jeopardize the speakers. Thank you very much for being with us. And next month we will have another one of the seminars. We're looking at trying to do one which is either about the future post-coup, if I can call it that, now that we're getting a better handle on what the future might look like, or something about the way the tapador are functioning. We'll see how we go. Thank you very much, and we'll see you in a month.
Thank you.
Thank
you,
you.
Mr. Barr. Thank you very much for your name.
Welcome.